Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, the film that showed the world what justice looks like. Released in 1961, Judgment at Nuremberg is often overshadowed by bigger war epics. But make no mistake, it is one of the most sobering and historically significant courtroom dramas ever made. Directed by Stanley Kramer and starring Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, Marlene Dietrich, Maximilian Schell, and Montgomery Clift, the film reconstructs the Nuremberg trials with startling honesty and emotional depth. It doesn't dramatize the Nazi leadership trials those had already passed. Instead, it focuses on the lesser-known judges' trial, in which 4 German jurists and legal officials were tried for enabling the Nazi regime through their courtrooms. It's a story that asks not about military guilt, but about moral complicity and what it means when the law itself becomes a weapon. Spencer Tracy plays a fictional American judge, Dan Haywood, brought in to oversee the trial. As he listens to the testimonies from victims, perpetrators, and witnesses, he is forced to confront a terrifying idea: that evil can wear a robe and speak in measured tones. One of the most haunting scenes comes from Montgomery Clift, portraying a man sterilized by state order. His testimony is fragmented, painful, and deeply human. It's a performance that broke hearts not with grandstanding, but with simplicity. The film also explores the tension between justice and politics. Should the United States go easy on German officials to win favor during the Cold War? Should guilt be mitigated by circumstance? These aren't questions with easy answers, and the film never pretends otherwise. Critically, Judgment at Nuremberg was praised. It earned 11 Academy Award nominations and won 2, including Best Actor for Maximilian Schell. But over the decades, it's been eclipsed by more action-driven World War II films. A Man for All Seasons, 1966, The Quiet Strength of Conscience. In an era of spectacle and sweeping war films, A Man for All Seasons stood apart not with action, but with silence, not with armies, but with one man's refusal to betray his beliefs. Released in 1966 and based on the acclaimed play by Robert Bolt, the film tells the true story of Sir Thomas More, the English statesman who chose principle over power and paid for it with his life. Directed by Fred Zinnemann and starring Paul Scofield in his Oscar-winning role, the film dramatizes More's final years as Lord Chancellor of England under King Henry VIII. The conflict? Henry wants to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, and to do it, he declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England. All he needs is More's approval, but More, a devout Catholic and a scholar of the law, cannot give it. What follows is not a tale of protest banners or fiery speeches. It's a quiet war of words, a chess game of conscience versus convenience. More tries to remain silent, hoping his refusal to openly oppose the king will protect him and his family. But in Henry's court, silence is treason. Paul Scofield's performance is subtle, measured, and devastating. He plays More not as a martyr, but as a man, thoughtful, loving, sometimes afraid. His strength is not in rebellion, but in restraint. He never yells, he never blusters. He simply refuses. And in that refusal lies the heart of the story. The historical Thomas More was canonized by the Catholic Church in 1935, but the film never leans into hagiography. It presents him as complex, noble but imperfect, firm but not rigid. The brilliance of Bolt's script lies in its moral ambiguity. Should More have compromised to stay alive for his family? Or did his death serve a greater good? The film doesn't force an answer. It invites reflection. Though A Man for All Seasons won 6 Academy Awards including Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Director, it remains strangely under-discussed today, perhaps because its drama is interior. The story of Louis Pasteur, 1936, The Battle Against Invisible Enemies. At a time when cinema was still finding its voice, and science was rarely the subject of serious drama, the story of Louis Pasteur dared to do both. Released in 1936, and starring Paul Muni in a quietly electrifying performance, this film brought the life of one of history's greatest scientific minds to the screen, not with spectacle, but with the quiet urgency of a man determined to save lives and almost destroyed for trying. Louis Pasteur, the French chemist and microbiologist, changed the course of modern medicine. His discoveries in germ theory, sterilization, and vaccination laid the groundwork for hygiene standards and disease prevention around the world. But the story of Louis Pasteur doesn't just recount his achievements, it dramatizes his long and lonely fight against a medical establishment that mocked, resisted, and actively sabotaged him. The film opens with Pasteur already established in his work on microbial theory, but dismissed as a fanatic by most of the medical elite. He warns against unsterilized surgical tools, advocates for boiled instruments, and speaks passionately about how invisible microbes spread disease only to be laughed out of medical conferences and accused of harming the public with dangerous nonsense. Paul Muni plays Pasteur with quiet gravity. He's not a flamboyant genius. He's a man of detail, conviction, and personal pain. He watches patients die from preventable infections, grows more isolated with every failed plea to the Academy of Medicine, and continues his work anyway in barns, in home laboratories, with test animals and handwritten notes. One of the film's most powerful scenes shows Pasteur desperately experimenting on sheep in an open field, trying to prove that his vaccine against anthrax works and that lives can be saved through prevention, not just reaction. What makes the film extraordinary is its restraint. There are no grand visual effects, no artificially inflated drama. Just dialogue, silence, and the slow build of a man standing against an invisible enemy and an even more dangerous one, institutional pride. When he eventually succeeds in proving his vaccine's effectiveness, the acknowledgement is reluctant. Doctors who once mocked him now whisper his theories in their own lectures. The praise comes too late, but Pasteur never demanded it. As he tells his family in one intimate scene, "It is not for honors that I do this. It is because I know it is true." The film was groundbreaking in its time. It was one of the first Hollywood pictures to center scientific discovery and ethics in a serious, dramatic form. Paul Muni won the Academy Award for Best Actor, and the film also took home Oscars for Best Story and Best Screenplay. The Long Voyage Home, 1940. The Forgotten Faces of War Supply Ships. Not all war films are about generals, battles, or medals. Some tell quieter stories of working men, lost between duty and survival, whose courage never makes the headlines. The Long Voyage Home, released in 1940 and directed by John Ford, is one of those films. Based on a series of one-act plays by Eugene O'Neill and inspired by real merchant marine accounts during the early days of World War II, the film offers a somber, poetic look at the lives of sailors on a doomed supply ship bound for England. At a glance, it doesn't fit the mold of a war epic. There are no battlefields, no cheering victories. Instead, it focuses on a small crew of international seamen, including an early performance by John Wayne as they transport a cargo of explosives across the Atlantic, constantly under threat from German U-boats. They know the risks, they know the odds, but the voyage goes on. What makes The Long Voyage Home historically significant is its attention to the overlooked role of the merchant marine during wartime. These were civilian ships, unarmed, often underpaid, delivering essential supplies and taking fire like any battleship. Tens of thousands of merchant mariners died in World War II, yet their stories are rarely dramatized. This film changed that. Visually, the film is breathtaking. Shot in deep shadow and stark contrast by legendary cinematographer Greg Toland, who would soon shoot Citizen Kane. Every frame feels like a photograph from a lost time. The fog, the ropes, the silhouettes of exhausted men on deck, it's less of a drama and more of a portrait, frozen in grainy light. John Ford, known for mythic Americana, takes a different approach here. There are no heroes, no villains, just men, some kind, some bitter, some too drunk to care. Among them is John Wayne's character, Ole Olsen, a Swedish farm boy who wants nothing more than to go home. Lust for Life, 1956. The torment and triumph of Van Gogh. Long before prestige biopics became a Hollywood staple, Lust for Life dared to tell the story of an artist suffering not as melodrama, but as intimate revelation. Released in 1956, directed by Vincente Minnelli, and based on Irving Stone's novel of the same name, this vivid, heartbreaking film chronicles the short, chaotic life of Vincent van Gogh, the Dutch painter whose genius was only fully recognized after his death. At the center is Kirk Douglas, delivering one of the most raw and physically immersive performances of his career. Gone is the confidence and command audiences had come to expect from Douglas in films like Spartacus or Champion. Here, he's fragile, uncertain, on fire, with visions only he seems to understand. From the very first frame, he inhabits Van Gogh's restless soul, a man drawn to beauty, yet constantly isolated from the world around him. The film spans Van Gogh's life from his early days as a failed preacher in a poor mining town to his turbulent years in France, where he produced hundreds of paintings in a near-manic state of productivity. But Lust for Life isn't a film about success. It's a film about obsession, loneliness, and the invisible line between brilliance and breakdown. Minnelli, himself known for visual storytelling, treats Van Gogh's inner life with extraordinary sensitivity. The cinematography, led by Russell Harlan, mirrors Van Gogh's evolving style from dark, shadowy interiors to the blinding sunlight of Arles. Fields of wheat rippled in golden hues. The Desert Fox, 1951. The general who turned against Hitler. Not all war heroes wear the uniform of the victors, and few military leaders have been as misunderstood as Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. In The Desert Fox, released in 1951 and directed by Henry Hathaway, Hollywood delivered one of its most surprisingly sympathetic portrayals of a German officer, a man revered by his troops, respected by his enemies, and ultimately executed for daring to defy Adolf Hitler. Based on Brigadier Desmond Young's biography, Rommel, The Desert Fox, the film stars James Mason in a career-defining performance. He plays Rommel not as a glorified tactician or tragic villain, but as a principled man torn between duty and conscience, a soldier who initially believed in his country's mission, only to realize he was serving a regime that could not be defended. The film opens after Rommel's North African campaign's battles that earned him his nickname, the Desert Fox, and the admiration of even his Allied counterparts. Winston Churchill himself once called Rommel a great general and a noble enemy. But The Desert Fox doesn't focus on battlefield triumph. It zooms in on what came after: Rommel's growing disillusionment with Hitler, his private horror at war crimes, and his quiet involvement in the failed 1944 plot to assassinate the Führer. The power of the film lies in its restraint. There are no grand action set pieces, no inflated dialogue. Much of the drama unfolds in candlelit rooms and whispered conversations between Rommel and his wife, his colleagues, and finally with the Nazi officials who confront him with a chilling ultimatum: take your own life or face a show trial that will endanger your family. James Mason brings gravitas and pathos to the role. His Rommel is composed, cerebral, and tormented a man who once believed in honor but found himself ensnared by history. In one particularly poignant scene, Rommel watches helplessly as Hitler rejects his warnings about Germany's crumbling military position. The look in Mason's eyes, quiet fury mixed with sorrow, says more than any monologue could. The Desert Fox was a bold film for its time. Just 6 years after the end of World War II, American audiences weren't accustomed to sympathetic portrayals of German officers. The film sparked controversy, especially in Britain, where some veterans viewed it as an insult. Young Mr. Lincoln, 1939, the making of a moral giant. Before Abraham Lincoln was a monument, before Gettysburg and Emancipation, he was just a lanky, self-taught lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, full of humor, hesitation, and untested ideals. John Ford's Young Mr. Lincoln, released in 1939 and starring Henry Fonda, captures this lesser-known chapter of Lincoln's life with remarkable simplicity and humanity. It is not a political epic, but a slow-burning portrait of integrity and formation, and one of the most underrated historical dramas of its time. The film follows a fictionalized version of a young Lincoln defending two brothers accused of murder. He's still learning the law, still unsure of his own moral compass. Yet through observation, instinct, and growing conviction, he begins to reveal the traits that would define his presidency: patience, compassion, and the unwavering belief that truth can and should be defended. What makes Young Mr. Lincoln stand out is its restraint. It doesn't try to cover his presidency or mythologize his image. There's no mention of war, slavery, or the White House. Instead, we see a man walking the muddy streets of a small town, unsure of how much he can do, and slowly realizing he must try anyway. Henry Fonda delivers one of the most understated and powerful performances of his career. With his tall frame and quiet demeanor, he doesn't imitate Lincoln so much as embody him. His voice is gentle, his humor is shy, and his eyes always watching. always weighing, suggests a man who feels the weight of doing what's right, even when it costs him favor or comfort. In one key scene, Lincoln watches a mob forming outside the jail where the accused brothers are being held. There's pressure to hand them over, to let violence do what the courts might delay. Lincoln doesn't shout. He doesn't posture. He simply stands between the crowd and the door, holding them back with calm, reasoning words. It's the first glimpse of the peacemaker he will become, not through charisma, but through conviction. Director John Ford, often known for sweeping westerns, turns inward here. The cinematography is soft, the pacing deliberate. Every detail, a candlelit courtroom, the quiet of a riverbank, a broken wagon wheel adds texture to a story about the growth of a moral leader. Ford seems less interested in creating drama than in observing character. Though Young Mr. Lincoln was well received critically upon release, it was soon overshadowed by more dramatic takes on Lincoln's legacy.